I try and teach therapists to get out of, especially if they're the child's therapist, to get out of referring to the other parent as your ex and instead your co-parent, because that really focuses and reminds them that's not a disposable person. It's somebody I chose to have children with, and the
Right.
consequences of the consequences of the choices that I made, other people chose not to have a child with this person. But
Right.
me, nope, I brought the child into the world, or more than one child, with this person.
Welcome to episode 277 of the Nacho Kids podcast.
Well.
What's wrong, David? You don't sound awake.
Because you got me up here early in the morning to record.
It's so funny, y'all, because I'm more of a morning person and David's more of a night person.
Yep.
But if we try to do the podcast in the evening, I get really aggravated with David, let's just say.
Only in the evening?
Yeah, for some reason. It's because I'm tired and you start making jokes and I'm like, crap, that's something I got to edit. But if we do it in the morning, I don't feel that stress.
Well, it's more important that you don't feel stressed than me. So we'll start doing it in the morning.
Why is it more important that I don't feel stressed than you?
Can I plead the fifth on that one?
Yeah, that's probably best.
Thank you.
So I want to tell y'all something that happened. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I'm hoping I can get Branson back on here because Branson and his fiance and their baby moved back in with us for a little bit while they were transitioning out of the military. So anyway, long story short, something happened while they were here that was a huge trigger for me. And of course, Branson didn't understand it because it wasn't a trigger for him. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a little bit of awkwardness, I guess, around us for a couple of days because of that.
Mm-hmm.
The awkwardness is gone, but we haven't talked about it. So I'm going to see if I can get him on here to talk about it.
Are you going to talk about it live?
Yep.
That could go horribly wrong.
It could. So if y'all never hear it, it's because it went horribly wrong. But no, I think it's
not to do it.
Yeah, I think it's important because I didn't see that coming. You know, we're all in such a good place. Things are great. But it was just one thing that was said. And it wasn't even about the past.
No.
That was a trigger for me. And I kicked into like PTSD or something. Not the victim, David, but like PTSD.
No, but I was here, but I think I was outside when it happened.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any different than the same reaction you would have had toward me with the same comment. So I don't see any. Go ahead.
I agree with you to a degree, but there was something that he added that you wouldn't have that made it worse.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that. I'm just saying that I didn't see your reaction as being uncharacteristic of you.
Well, that might not be a good thing.
No, I'm just saying it's, sometimes people say you respond differently because it's my kid versus me or your kid or whatever. Now, would you have responded differently if it was your kid? Probably.
Mm-hmm.
That's expected. Would you respond any differently if I just said it and added the same thing on the end of it? Probably not. Probably been the exact same response.
Yeah, you're right.
But,
you're right.
But I didn't disagree with your response. And Branson and I have talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, y'all talked about it because he's like, what's up with Lori? What's wrong with her?
Yeah, because it's like, what's going on with that? And, I was like, if you analyze what you said, you probably could figure this out,
Mm-hmm.
So I helped him to better understand it, even though it still caught him off guard. But hey, he's young. You have to learn how to deal with humans and human nature, and you got to learn when it's appropriate to say things and when it's not. And when you say things in an accusatory manner, when you don't have all the information, then you're walking in a landmine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we'll see if I can't get Brant's pants back on here and see if he'll talk about it publicly.
All right. Cool.
All right. Other than that, registration is open for the Change Your Stinking Thinking Guided Nacho Kids Challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And this includes an email every day to a link with a task and some information. And there will be 4 calls throughout the month, group calls to discuss the challenge.
Cool.
The cost is $197. And if you do the work, you will have a different viewpoint on life at the end of this month.
Mm-hmm. No doubt about it.
No doubt about it.
Yep.
All right. We also, until the end of the month, remember, leave a podcast review, take a screenshot, send it to me or us at contactus@nachokids.com and be entered to win a $100 Amazon gift card.
All right, cool. Lots of stuff going on.
Yes. And David, the other day you said that this will probably be our last challenge of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh no, we could probably still do the expectations challenge. Y'all, this month has been crazy. We're only halfway through, and I have so much to do this week that I'm freaking out. And so, yeah, we probably won't do another challenge.
So is that your long way of saying I was right?
No, you can see now that makes me want to do it even more. Be like, oh no, we're going to do it in December. I don't care what you say, David Sims. So we'll see. We have a lot going on. All right, y'all, our guest today, I had tried to get him on the podcast for a while, and there was, timing issues, but I finally got him on this podcast. And it is great. It is Bradley Craig, who wrote Between Two Homes.
Oh, yeah.
A co-parenting handbook. I didn't realize how much I was going to enjoy talking to Bradley. I hate that sounds that way, but I mean, I knew it would be a good interview, but like, I want him back for a month. I need to talk to him like 8 hours straight, because so much of what is in that book, it can help tremendously. And the only way that we heard about Bradley, which you'll hear about in the podcast, was we had Academy members that mentioned it to us. And one of the things that they said resonated with me, and we'll talk more about that with Bradley. And I think it's just important to, as he says, to help parents shift from a litigation mindset to a business mindset of co-parenting. Ultimately, to improve the quality of life for children growing up between two homes.
So he suggests having a business mindset toward it.
Yes.
That's exactly
That's what
how
we do.
I approach. Yeah, it's exactly how I approach a lot. In fact, I often explain it in ways that are business related and talk about it in those ways. And I think, I 100% agree. And there's so much of the family dynamics that if you treated it like, look, this is, we're in a boardroom, we're treating this like a business. I mean, even if it's a small family business, you have people that make decisions, you have people that have to do things, and you have to cooperate. I mean, there's so much of it that is similar. And if you just look at it from that perspective, it makes it a lot easier to handle these things.
Right. And we often, both of us, use analogies to office or work when it comes to the Nacho Kids method. One of them being, if you're hired as the customer service rep, you don't go sit in the CEO's chair and expect to be treated like the CEO. But anyway, a lot of the stuff in his book can be applied to nachoing.
Oh, yeah.
And vice versa. A lot of the stuff that we teach, falls into the category, or could fall into the category of what he's teaching. But it was awesome. It was a great conversation. Again, I want to have him back soon because I've got so many more questions. But he also, thank you, Bradley, by the way, connected me with a guy from My Family Wizard.
Okay.
So he's going to be on our podcast.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah,
because I started asking Bradley questions about it. And then all of a sudden he's like, look, I feel like I'm doing a promo for them. Let's get back to me. And so anyway, he grew up between two homes. And so that's a lot of what I talked to him about during this interview. But we also
Mhm.
talk about the book. Anyway, that's all I'm going to tell you right now. That's enough.
Okay. Yeah. Let's get listening. I'm excited.
I am too. It's good. I'm telling you, it's good.
All right, folks, let's dive into it and get to listening.
Today, we have a very special guest. We have Bradley S. Craig, author of Between Two Homes, a co-parenting handbook. Bradley,
Yes, ma'am.
tell me what all these letters mean by your name at the bottom.
So that's licensed master social worker, independent practice recognition. It's a Texas thing.
Okay.
And then I'm a certified family life educator as well, which is a national certification. So that's what all
Awesome.
that stands for. Basically, I'm a licensed social worker in Texas.
Okay. I had never heard of you. And granted, you wrote your book after we had started blending. I think you wrote your book in 2014. Is that correct? Or published it in 2014?
That sounds probably right.
Sounds probably right. Well, actually, the way I heard about you was we had a couple in our Nacho Kids Academy, and we were doing a group coaching call, and they mentioned to us about not saying like your mom's house
Mhm.
or your dad's house. And so they were telling us a little bit about it. And I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. So I looked into it and I love it. I have to say, though, I had, let's see, how would you say this? The furthest from a co parenting relationship that you can get with my ex. Your information in this book is priceless. But my first question to you is both parties have to be willing, correct?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
The long run, yes. Sometimes it depends on court intervention. So, for example, I have an online class too, and
Yes.
that course is approved by a lot of courts nationally. Not all of them. Unfortunately, there's a lot of online class with false advertisement that says approved by your court. And
Yes.
I know my local judges don't approve them. So we have a disclaimer on our website that says, you know what, make sure that the course is approved. But there are several states that approve our online class, and that can be a catalyst for change,
Yes.
when the court orders them. Also, for example, most of my work is working with high conflict families.
Mhm.
So if they're appointed what's nationally called a parenting coordinator, what we call here in Texas a parenting facilitator, that can be helpful too. So when
Is that like a guardian ad litem?
no, that role is somebody who works with just the parents, and the job of the parenting coordinator nationally, and each state has different laws, and some states don't have parenting coordinators in their statutes anyway. Person who basically is case managing a high conflict family, working with mom and dad, sometimes the entire family system, which could be stepmom, stepdad, stepchildren. That person can be an attorney or a mental health professional. For example, here in Texas, it can be an attorney or a mental health professional. And I use a two-team model of a colleague who is female, and then myself as male, working as the parenting coordinator. So those type of interventions from the court or the right referral from a therapist or something may help educate somebody to want to change, is what
Right.
I was trying to say. So yes, in the long run, they have to want to change, but there are certain tools that can help them want to change. And for example, in Texas, a parenting facilitator can report back to the court. So that's helpful. It motivates parents to want to change.
Some.
There's a financial and legal incentive for them to change generally. And so that can be helpful, but certainly not across the board.
Right. We also deal with high conflict families. A lot of times the conflict is internally in the step family, and sometimes it's external.
Yeah.
And it's hard seeing people struggle like this. That's why I love your book, because it helps people. And then you have your course. I'm actually writing my book. Wish me luck.
Yeah, good luck.
And we've got courses too, but you do it like we do to help people. And I was reading the about you, I think it was in the beginning or the preface of the book. And it was like at some point it clicked with you that things weren't going like you thought they were. Can you elaborate on that and tell our listeners about that?
Or readers too, I guess, in the
Yeah.
future, if you have your podcast and your book, and you want to quote some of this.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I was very well. Let me go way back in time. The reason I specialize in this field is I'm a child who grew up between two homes, And there were a lot of things my parents did right. There's an awful lot that they did wrong. And we have a lot of assumptions about this best interest of children statement that you hear. The courts, it has to be in the child's best interest, but rarely do court orders and things address the real best interest of a child. For example, how about ordering the parents to live close together? How about ordering that the children get to have their best friends, independent of whose parenting time it is? In Texas, sometimes the courts do restrict a parent from taking the child out of state, but that doesn't always happen. And so there's a lot of things that create more and more concerns for the child. And so for me growing up, there were things like when my parents separated, I wasn't really all that shocked. And I did a video where I interviewed lots of children and adults who were children growing up between two homes, where everybody on there said the same thing I did. I never
Same.
thought it
Oops.
was, yeah, I never thought it
Same.
was my fault, first of all, because we teach people, and I teach people, make sure and tell your children it's not their fault. But
Mhm.
most kiddos don't seem to think it's their fault, except maybe in high conflict situations where a parent manipulates the child.
Or if a parent just ups and leaves.
Yeah, yeah. And so the child may be questioning, did they leave because of me? Especially if, let's say, the night before they were grounded or something like that happened, and it was just coincidental timing that person left. But I hated words like, well, first of all, I hate being called a child of divorce. That's not who I am. I
Right.
hate that label. And I think mental health professionals abuse and overuse it, as well as attorneys and society in general, calling us children of divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Brad Craig. A divorce is something that a judge signs. That's a legal document. That's what it is. And that doesn't label me the rest of my life. And like you mentioned, the mom's house, dad's house, I hated that phrase because it was like, where do I belong? I wanted a dog house where I could scratch out the name Spot, write in the name Brad, and have someplace I could call my own.
Yeah.
When you refer to it as your child's other home, or when you're talking to the child, your house with your mom, your house with your dad, or your other home, there's a lot of power in that. And it also helps us think differently. If I think it's my house, then, well, I get to do what I want. It's my house, my rules, my way. I don't have to do it the way the other house does it. And if I get remarried and I want to change the rules, I'll just change the rules. If I think about it as my child's other house, I'm more likely to think about, wait, this is their other home. Maybe bedtime ought to be near the same time. And maybe we can use some carryover discipline. And maybe getting remarried doesn't mean we change the rules for the child. Mm-hmm. Getting remarried means we explain to the person we're about to get married, this is the way we do it. I hope you are okay with that. If not, maybe we shouldn't get married. And so my experience growing up really motivated me to want to make the world better for children growing up between two homes. And then I got a job working for the county where I was doing custody evaluations. And I did that for about 6 years before I decided I don't want to investigate these families and provide reports to the courts. I want to work with these families and help them learn to work together. And so I stopped working for the county and opened up my program. And then eventually that spilled into a live class and then online class and then books and then working with high conflict families and now doing a bunch of professional seminars. So that was the very long answer to your question.
Well, the good thing is I have a multitude of questions after your answer.
Oh, good.
How old were you when your parents split?
10.
10. So you were fairly young.
I was fairly young. Yeah. Yeah. My parents were having difficulties in their marriage and we lived in California. And so then they moved to Texas thinking maybe that would help because we had the support of the family. Mm-hmm. But it didn't. And they ended up separating. And, that's one of the things that I talk about too is for an awful lot of children, including myself, the divorce of my parents wasn't as shocking to me. I kind of expected that. Mm-hmm. What was shocking was the divorce between my grandparents. Because they used to get along so very well. They lived very close to each other. During the summers, I'd go hang out with both sets of grandparents because they lived, within 5 minutes from each other's house. And once my parents separated, so did my family members. It became maternal versus paternal as opposed to just them getting along. I remember I was probably 15 and my dad had moved to California. And so I was coming back from a trip from California. And I remember walking off the plane and I saw my mom and my paternal grandfather standing there. And I remember just being really nervous about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen?
Right.
They ended up hugging each other. And, even at age 15, where, I'm masculine, I'm not going to cry. Even now, sometimes when I talk about it, I tear up a little bit about how important that was to me, that there was at least some of that reconciliation, that my paternal grandmother, for example, would communicate with my mom as a daughter once everything healed. But that's something we miss with a lot of these families is it becomes maternal versus paternal as opposed to, okay, let these two people separate or divorce or whatever they're going to do, but we can all still be a family. We can still all go celebrate at Chuck E. Cheese birthday parties.
Yes. And it's so hard. I know even with my parents divorcing when I was 31, I knew it was going to happen. They should have divorced when I was 10.
Hmm.
Really. They were miserable together. And so it was just a matter of time.
Hmm.
And I really think now, of course, I'm speculating 100%, but I feel like my life would have been happier if they would have.
Possibly.
Because living as a child where your parents do not have a healthy relationship, you carry a lot of weight with that.
Hmm.
Because every other week is we're getting divorced. Who are you going to go live with? Why do you keep asking me this? It's going to be my daddy,
Hmm.
kind of
Right.
thing. You know where I'm going. You just want
Hmm.
me to hurt your feelings, kind of thing.
Right.
And
And
but
what a
he,
horrible choice to ask a child, right?
yeah, yeah,
Hey, let's pick between the two most important people in your life. It's horribly cruel.
right,
We have parents who do it, and Jack Abernoff, and I'm maybe mispronouncing his name. It's from the movie Catch Me If You Can. But I have a video that I play at professional seminars where he's actually been interviewed. And he said the reason that led up to all his criminal behaviors and actions was he remembers appearing before the judge and the judge asking him to pick between his parents, and he just couldn't do it. And he ran out of that courtroom and I think ended his relationship with his dad and didn't talk to his mom for like 5 years or something. I'm not getting all that
right,
exactly
right,
right.
right,
But yeah, that's just such a horribly cruel choice. But you're right. Sometimes for children growing up between two homes, when oil marries water, there's a lot of conflict. And if oil and water separate or divorce, and I don't really talk as much about divorce because I work with an awful lot of families that are raising children between two homes and they were never married.
right.
Or maybe they're a same sex couple and they chose not to get married. Now they can legally, but they've just been living together for so long and then they separate, fill in the blank.
Hmm.
After that separation, if water marries water and oil marries oil, then children get to be exposed to what a loving, nurturing couple looks like.
Right.
Where stepmom and dad or stepdad and mom are saying, I love you. They're being affectionate publicly. They're sleeping in the same room, not one down on the couch. You
Hmm.
know, it's interesting you mentioned that your parents separated when you were what, 31, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. You've probably heard of this, but there's a lot of studies now coming out on what's called the gray divorce. And the
Yeah.
gray divorce is people that are divorcing, after their children are out of the home or when they're elderly. And some of that research is on the impact of the children. And one of those patterns that we see is, for example, a lot of times these parents will separate when their children are in college.
Hmm.
And then they'll tell the child, well, the only reason we stayed together was for you. What a huge burden to place
Yeah.
on a child. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you ripped the carpet from under me because I believed that you guys were the example of what a healthy marriage is. And
Or
so,
it's my fault y'all lived in misery for that long.
yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, that creates misery for you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So when you became a child of divorce, which I know you hate that. I'm sorry. I must have vibed in David somehow because that's something David would say. But d- did you do the 50-50?
No. I spent most of the time with my mom. And then my dad eventually moved to California. So I'd see him in the summers for about 45 days sometimes.
And was that not weird? I mean, I know
Uh,
it's your dad, but at some point, I'm assuming he remarried or,
He did when I was later in my teen years.
okay.
He remarried, and I was not close to my stepmother. Well, let's put it that
So
way.
did you
um,
ever feel like your dad's was your home?
um, I would say when they first separated, when he moved into an apartment, yes, because he was seeing me more frequently.
Mhm.
But my mom was a very strong woman. My mom did a great job taking care of me. My dad was an alcoholic. My dad struggled with a lot of problems, and so when he moved to California, first I was raised in California, so I loved California and I liked being able to go there. But, my dad was just not a very wise parent. He was drunk quite often. He worked downtown in San Francisco. So, at age 13, I think it was, he's like, hey, I'm going to work today. Go to San Francisco. And so I'd walk the streets of San Francisco. Back then I thought it was so cool. But now as an adult, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's amazing I turned out the way I did.
I agree. I don't know what San Francisco was like back in the day, but I know I went several years ago, and let's just say it is very different from where I live in South Carolina.
And it was very different back then, even than it was now. It was full of topless clubs, lots of drugs on the street, lots of other things. So now you see some of the homeless and things like that, but they've cleaned up a lot of other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a crazy time in my life. I learned a lot about kind of street life.
I know when my parents split up, like I said, it was not a surprise. The behavior that was exhibited by one particular party was not admirable, nor did I feel that it was appropriate and necessary because they raised me better than to act that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there was a lot of hurt, but as an adult child that your parents split up, however you want to call us,
yeah,
my mom wanted to act like she was her friend. And that caused a lot of issues because I'm a daddy's girl.
mm-hmm.
And it's not like I came out saying, I'm not going to like my mom. It's just, I had that relationship with my dad. And finally, one day I told her, I said, you've got to stop. I am not your friend.
Mm-hmm.
She said, well, I need to talk to somebody. I said, then find a therapist or a counselor or a friend, but I'm your daughter and that's my dad.
Mm-hmm. There's some studies that looked at, there's something called parentification. Parentification, yes. When we first looked at parentification, it was more about, because this was identified long before with the divorce rate is what it is now. Parentification was occurring a lot when a child would have maybe, or a group of children would have a sick parent, and the oldest child became the caretaker of the whole household. And let's say the other parent maybe worked long hours. So parentification occurred that the child was taking care of the parent. Some of the studies in the past few years looking at the impact on children of growing up between two homes is increased risks of parentification. And it makes sense because we start interfering with things that are not natural for them. Peer relationships. These kids get stuck with first, third, and fifth weekend friends and second and fourth weekend friends if the parents don't live in a close proximity and if they don't support those peer relationships.
Oh, and activities.
Yeah.
David and I, we kind of joked about this, but we were really serious about it. That, like my son, I had him all the time except for every other weekend, a week in June, July, and August, and a week at Christmas, something like that. But he couldn't do sports because unless his dad took him, which I knew better than to plan something on the ex's time. We had such a poor co-parenting relationship that I didn't even want to ask because of what came with it. So we were joking about how they need to have every other weekend ball tournaments, or not tournaments, but
extracurricular activities.
Yeah, ball teams. And that way you're not punished for not showing up the weekends that you couldn't. And even churches. When the kids are with the other parent, don't punish them by not giving them a sticker that week because it's out of their control. And then they don't get the prize at the end. And that just makes them hate the situation more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's no fun when you're in a school play or you're doing gymnastics or you're playing soccer, fill in the blank with any of those things, that other kids are getting together for rehearsals and practice, but you're missing those rehearsals and practices. And so for children, I think they often start questioning, maybe I just don't have the skills. Look at my friends, they're doing really well. That's not that they don't have the skills. It's just that, they're not as interactive in that peer activity or extracurricular activity as other kids are. But, the good news is, with all this research coming out, courts are starting to address those type of things. Extracurricular activities are typically, at least here in Texas, incorporated in court orders and things to be able to facilitate the child being able to attend extracurricular activities.
Yeah, it's hard.
It is. And then when your parent moves away, like
Yes.
my dad did. So there's the 45 days in the summer. I was talking about that. I actually really liked California, but what I hated about it was, this is what we do as kids. We spend our whole school year waiting for school to end so we can spend the summer with our friends.
And
So
your
we can go
friends were not in
to,
California.
yeah, to go to school camps and do all these things and to hang out. I mean, church camps or whatever, we want to hang out with our friends. Now, the only advantage for me, and I've addressed this in some of my professional seminars, is I had a friend that I grew up with in San Quentin, the town, not the prison. Who
Are
I
you
knew,
sure about that?
yeah, we did live 5 houses outside of the prison. That's
Oh,
how close
wow.
it was. But I had a best friend that I met as a best friend before we can remember each other. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
we shared cribs and things together between our parents. And so I was able to stay in touch with him for the years. And so when I would go down for the summer, a lot of times my dad would let me spend, at least a week with Steve, and Steve would come spend time with me. And so that was really great. And he was probably one of the strongest relationships that I've had in my life. My brother passed away when I was very young, before they ever divorced.
I'm
So
sorry.
Steve was very much like a brother for me. He just recently passed away, but so there
Oh.
was that advantage that at least I got to see a peer and somebody who was very much like a brother to me, somebody that I loved.
So you had one sibling that passed away,
Mhm.
and I'm sorry. Do you have another sibling, or was that it?
That was it.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I was born, and I think my parents decided, yeah, that's a good stop.
yeah, yeah. So your brother that passed away was older.
He was older than I was. I was only 3 when he passed away, so I was very young.
Okay. And do you think that had anything to do with your parents' divorce? Just
I'm
curious.
Yeah, death of children often negatively impact relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. When did your parents co-parent well? Sorry, I had a train of thought and then I jumped.
I would say they're in the middle ground.
Yeah. Well, they
They weren't
probably
they weren't screaming, yelling, cussing each other out. My dad a couple times was asking me and begging me, will come live with me, even though he didn't pay child support, wasn't actively involved, didn't come down to visit me or attend my functions. So there's some of that going on. My mother did a pretty good job of not speaking negatively about my dad. But there were times that she and my paternal uncle made the decision that it really wasn't safe for me to go out to spend time with my dad. And so she would always let me know that it's, your dad's free to call you. I just don't think it's a really good idea for you to go out there this summer,
and
but not explaining why.
right. And as a parent, that's hard to tell your kid because she knew you were looking forward to going, or at least a little bit of you was.
Yeah, sure.
And two, you don't want to say anything about your dad, but
Right.
there's also times, and I've experienced this, that things need to be said for the protection of the child.
Mhm.
It's not, I'm ratting on your dad. It's, let's help you be smarter than the average bear. Let's, make you aware of certain things you need to watch out for,
Mhm.
kind of thing.
It's filtering it the appropriate way or seeking the appropriate professional to do it.
Right.
Letting your child talk to a counselor or therapist about some of those things, and asking the child's counselor sometimes, what's the best way for me to approach this with them? What language can I use to make it neutral?
Yeah. Russian might be your best bet. Well, so you wrote this book, and I have a phrase that I say a lot, and it is, your hate for your ex cannot outweigh the love for your kid.
Mhm.
And I see that a lot.
Mhm.
I'm sure you see that a lot.
Yep.
And those are the ones that probably have the parallel parenting relationships like I did,
Mhm.
because you cannot get along. There's just no, and even if you start to, something happens, something little happens, and then it just goes all the way back.
It's kind of that roller coaster. And that's
Yeah.
where this is a cooperative co-parenting book, really, but parallel co-parenting is usually what I'm implementing with a lot of my high conflict families, or at least a combination of those two. And some of my families are able to work towards a more cooperative co-parenting relationship with a
But
lot of
isn't
information.
parallel parenting kind of an oxymoron, or parallel co-parenting?
So I language is, important to me, but it's different from one professional to the other.
Right.
I call it all co-parenting, but there's just three versions of co-parenting to me.
Mhm.
There's cooperative co-parenting,
Mhm.
there's parallel co-parenting, and then
Mhm.
there's conflicted co-parenting. Cooperative
Oh, wait a
co-parenting
minute.
is
I might have been in the conflicted. All right, go ahead.
might be cooperative co-parenting is where, you know, both parents get along very well. And, step family members are a compliment. Mom and stepmom are hanging out with each other and having a good time and having really good contact and interaction. That's a cooperative co-parenting family. Parallel co-parenting is where there have to be some pretty safe boundaries in place. These are the things we will talk about. These are the things we won't talk about. There may be less continuity between the two homes because frankly, for a lot of the case I work with, the parents are just like, well, it's my house and I want to do it my way, as opposed to what would be
My
best
house,
for
my
the child,
rules.
create that continuity and consistency. But parallel, there may be those differences. I have a handout on my website that explains the differences between cooperative and parallel. Conflicted is, where parents are screaming, yelling at each other, putting the child in the middle, using the child as a secret agent or a messenger, over involving the child, asking them where they want to live, bringing them to court, fill in the blanks with all those things. That's usually where now nationally a parenting coordinator gets appointed, is when the court determines, okay, this is a conflicted co-parenting situation and we need to get them at least to parallel.
Right, right. Yes, you have stood corrected. I am a conflicted parent. We
Conflicted.
were conflicted parenting, conflicted co-parenting. There we go. Yeah,
One of the things you mentioned a lot too is your ex.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I do as a professional is I never use that word when I'm working with my families because I want to remind them. But remember, my role is often a case manager to them.
Right.
I'm doing parenting coordination facilitation. That my ex refers to your previous intimate relationship. The
Mhm.
one relationship you constantly and consistently will have as long as your child is alive is your co-parenting relationship.
Mhm.
So when I work with families, I always talk about, well, what did your co-parent say? Or their first name. Well, what did Bill
Mhm.
say about this? Or what did Sally say? I try and teach therapists to get out of, especially if they're the child's therapist, to get out of referring to the other parent as your ex and instead your co-parent. Because that really focuses and reminds them that's not a disposable person. It's somebody I chose to have children with. And the
Right.
consequences of
Well.
the consequences of the choices that I made, other people chose not to have a child with this person. But
Right.
me, nope, I brought the child into the world, or more than one child, with this person.
Yeah, yeah. It's just funny you say that because I'm thinking of referring to my ex. I get what you're saying 100%, but to refer to him as a co-parent makes me want to gag.
Well, another thing you could say is my child's dad,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
what he is. And that's a term I often, talking to a teacher, my child's dad or my child's mom, the teacher already knows the child's growing up between two of them, so we don't have to use that term X. And again, just think about being the child sitting there. I think about me being 11 years old and hearing a term
Oh.
like my ex. I wouldn't want my mom or dad referring to each other that way. But if they were to say my dad, oh, I know
Yeah.
you're talking about mom.
Yeah. I think when you said that, I'm thinking back. I think when I talked to Jackson, I of course say your dad, not my ex.
Yeah.
I can see where in conversation they could hear that
Yeah.
and it could have a negative connotation.
Yeah. And the word co-parenting is out there enough that there's no reason not to use it instead of X. If you're on the phone talk, oh, my co-parent and your child's in the room, there's no reason to use my ex because co-parent is now a word that's known nationally.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot.
I'm all about strength-based with the families I work with.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I see a lot of this stuff that we need people in the academy to implement because that helps take a lot of the stress off.
Mm-hmm.
Just even how you word things. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Daniel Amen.
Not ringing a bell.
He's some brain genius and he studies the brain and he talks about automatic negative thinking, ants. And that's one of the things that we teach is you automatically think this stuff,
Yeah.
but you can control it. That's the thing is you can control how it makes you feel when your co-parent makes you angry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when you say they made me do this, no, you chose to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference. One thing I want to bring up, I saw in your book that jumped out at me. Well, I saw a lot of stuff, but
Well, and there's a section in the book that talks about that, the whole blame thing. You made me. No, you chose to do it.
Yeah.
There's a whole section on cognitive behavioral challenges where, where I label some of those behaviors where our brain just goes to a certain place and we have to correct that over time and go, oh, wait, no, I chose to do that. I chose to scream and yell. They didn't make me scream or yell.
Or I allowed them to make me mad.
Yeah, I allowed them to make me mad, as opposed to, if I keep looking at this long enough, I can look at it and go, boy, they used to really push my buttons, and I let them do that. Now I can almost chuckle to myself. Oh, I see you're trying to pull my strings. Good job.
Yeah.
I won't say it out loud, but
right. So I think I don't have my little old people readers on. I think it was like page 89, but I'm probably really way off. Hang on. Let me put my glasses on.
I don't even have my book in front of me, so now don't make me.
Wow.
I have my workbook. Oops,
yeah,
that's stupid.
I've got the workbook too.
Yeah, the workbook is great to me for therapists that are working with families raising children between two.
Right.
But I would get. But with your group, though, I bet there's a lot of exercises in there that might be really relevant. I hadn't even thought about that.
Well, don't you have like a certification course?
A what?
A certification course. Or is it all the same? Because the people that we knew that told us about you took your course. It was court ordered. Mm-hmm. And then I have a friend that does step family stuff, and she took a course that you offer. And I don't know if they're the same one.
So I do professional seminars, and a few of my professionals are online. Okay. A few of my professional seminars are online, but also travel nationally. So it could, most likely they're talking about two different things. Most likely one is talking about maybe a professional seminar that they took live or virtually, where the parents probably took a co-parenting education class. Okay. So for example, I have an online workshop called Intervention Between Two Homes, and it's for therapists that are working with families raising children between two homes.
I need to take that. That would give us a lot of help with the people we work with too.
I would think there might be some tools in there that could be helpful.
Oh, a bunch. Yeah, definitely. Because it's life skills.
Right.
It's learning to let go of control of things you don't have control of in the first place.
Yeah.
Pausing, learning to respond instead of react, and changing your perspective on things, as well as looking at things and giving it the proper emotional weight. Is it really that big of a deal if you're co-parent? Look there, I'm remembering. If you're co-parent, let little Johnny drink a half a Mountain Dew.
Exactly.
Right. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
And a lot of time, it's funny, I just thought of this, but a lot of times our behavior as adults in those situations are similar to that of a 15-year-old when they had their first breakup. It's the end of the world. Everything's the end of the world. And so a lot of it's just mindset. It's mindset and realizing why there's so many struggles.
Yeah. I work with, well, again, a lot of high conflict families. What I talk to them about is emotional maturity. There's you're physically 48, but emotionally you're acting like a 15-year-old. And those behaviors and the blame game are typical of victim thinking, which is typical of a teenager. It's everybody else's fault, not mine. Most of us outgrow that at about age 25, but clearly that hasn't happened in your case. I don't usually say it.
I want to talk about that too. I'm going to have you on here for like a week because I've got so many questions. But in the book on page 66 of Obstacles to Co-parenting, the victim view, you've got a chart. The victim view is I can't. The responsible view is I can, but I choose not to. And I cannot stand it when somebody in my Facebook group or even in the academy, sometimes people say, I can't nacho that. No. You can. You are choosing not to.
Yeah.
It's really simple.
I can't sit in the same room with that person. Yes, you
right.
can. You physically can.
Yes.
I mean, there's no law that says you can't. Now, if there's domestic violence and other things involved,
we're not talking about that.
Yeah, it's probably not safe to, and that is dangerous, and so you probably shouldn't do it if there's domestic violence or if there's risk. But other than that, if you're just uncomfortable, well, go see a therapist. Go work through those things. Don't tell me that our taxpayers have to pay for this teacher to have two separate parent-teacher conferences because two parents choose not to sit in the same room together or choose not to allow stepfamily members to get as much information as possible. Now, when I say that, I work with very high conflict families. In many of my cases, part of the problem is the stepmother or part of the problem is the stepfather.
Yep.
But not in all of my cases. In
Right.
fact, there've been plenty of cases where I'm like, wow. Even when I was doing custody evaluations, there were cases where I was like, what I want to do is recommend stepmom for custody and that she divorced dad. But because I'm in Texas, I can't make that recommendation.
Yeah.
So my book talks about co-parenting supporters and co-parenting detractors. And that's one of those handouts that I like to give to step family members is, like you mentioned, how do we look at the situation? What do I have control over? But also empathy. Let me
Yes.
stop and put myself in the shoes of this child.
And that's hard to do.
It is. It's very hard.
And this wraps back around to the victim statement or victim mentality, because I do have questions about that. When you are in the middle of it and everything just is upside down, you feel like you are the victim. So when things were going so bad with us, I'm not making this up. David's mom, will say, didn't like me. His sister didn't like me. Not only did they not like me, but they talked about me and made it well known. The kids didn't like me, and they had no problem making it well known. The bio mom didn't like me. The only kid that loved me was my baby. But, I said something to David, and he said, quit having the victim mentality. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That ticked me off, number one. But number two, I'm like, how am I not the victim? I don't understand, because it's not like I was making this up. I wasn't imagining what was happening. And out of everybody's issues, I was the focus. I was the problem. So help me understand that as far as the victim mentality, because I don't want to have a victim mentality, but I still, to this day, I'm like, wait a minute, this was happening to me. Okay, y'all. So we are going to interrupt this podcast. We don't normally do this, but we realize this is a longer than normal podcast episode. So we are going to continue this episode next week, and you will hear what Bradley says to me about the victim mentality. See y'all then. And remember, life is good when you nacho.